All right, let's talk about it. The age-old question, should you rent or should you buy? It is one of the biggest financial decisions we ever have to make. And honestly, the whole debate can feel pretty overwhelming. But what if there was a way to cut through all that noise? A simple framework to get to a real data-driven answer. Well, that's what we're going to do. So the question seems simple enough, right? Renting versus buying. Which one is actually the smarter financial move? The answer, though, well, it's anything but simple. See, this isn't about which path is better in general. It's about which path is better for you right now. And to figure that out, we need to look at the numbers in a totally different way. Here's where most people make a huge mistake right out of the gate. They compare a monthly rent check to a total mortgage payment. But that is not an apples to apples comparison, not even close. The real smart question to ask is about unrecoverable costs. That's the money you spend on housing that you will never, ever get back. For a renter, that's easy. It's your rent. But for a homeowner, it's a whole lot more complicated. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to completely reframe the question. Then, we'll dig in and calculate all those hidden, unrecoverable costs of owning a home. That's going to lead us to this really powerful shortcut called the 8.71% rule. After that, we'll look beyond the math at some of the flaws and, the human factors. And finally, we'll get to your personal bottom line. Okay, so our main goal here is to find the financial tipping point. We're looking for that specific monthly cost, where owning a home becomes the financial equivalent of renting a similar one. Once we nail down that number, making a clear decision gets a whole lot easier. Let's get right to the heart of this framework. We are going to calculate the true unrecoverable costs of owning a home. These are all the expenses that a renter, well, they just never have to worry about. And it really all boils down to three main things. First, you've got your property taxes. Second, the inevitable maintenance costs, because stuff always breaks. And third, the biggest and most misunderstood one of them all, the cost of capital. First up, property taxes. Every single year, you're paying the government a percentage of your home's value just for the privilege of owning it. Here in the US, the average is about 1.11%. So if you're looking at a $500,000 home, that's over $5,000 a year. That's just, poof, gone forever. Next up is maintenance. You know how it is. Things break, roofs leak, water heaters decide to give up. A really good rule of thumb is to budget at least 1% of your home's value every year just for upkeep and repairs. So for that same $500,000 house, that's another $5,000 a year that you're just not getting back. And now for the biggest piece of this whole puzzle, the cost of capital. I know, it sounds super complicated and technical, but it's really just two things: the hidden cost of your down payment and the very, very real cost of your mortgage interest. Let's start with that down payment. When you sink, say, $100,000 into a house, well, that's $100,000 that isn't invested somewhere else, like in the stock market. That potential return you're missing out on, it's a very real, even though it's invisible, cost. We call it opportunity cost. And this chart really makes that idea crystal clear. If you look at the historical returns after you account for inflation, the stock market averages about 7.2% a year. Housing, on the other hand, is closer to 2%. That gap, that roughly 5% difference, that is your opportunity cost. It's the potential money you're leaving on the table by tying up your down payment in a house. Okay, so we've got our three key costs all lined up. Now let's see what happens when we put them all together. This is how we create one simple, really powerful rule of thumb. And here's where it all comes together. We start with that 1.11% for property taxes. We add 1% for maintenance. Now for the cost of capital. Remember, this is a blend of the mortgage interest. We'll use a long-term average around 3.5% and that 5% opportunity cost on your down payment. When you blend them together, it averages out to about 6.6%. So the big question is, what do we get when we add all three of those up? And there it is, 8.71%. This right here, this is the magic number we have been building towards. It represents the total slice of your home's value that you lose to those unrecoverable costs on average every single year. And this gives us the 8.71% rule. It's a quick way to find your financial break-even point. You just take the price of a home, you multiply it by 8.71%, and then you divide that by 12. The number you get is the monthly rent that would be financially equivalent to owning that home. So if you can rent for less than that number, then just based on this math, renting is the cheaper option. But of course, life isn't just a formula. I mean, while this rule is an incredibly useful starting point, We absolutely have to talk about its flaws and all the human factors that numbers just can't capture. Now, we have to be really honest about the rule's assumptions. It assumes that a renter is going to be perfectly disciplined and invest all that money they would have used for a down payment. And, well, let's be real, that's not always the case. It also simplifies how mortgages work, and it doesn't account for things like constantly changing interest rates or even potential tax benefits that could really tip the scales. And then there's the whole non-financial side of things, right? Owning can give you this amazing sense of stability and control, and it's basically a forced savings plan. But on the other hand, renting gives you incredible flexibility, total freedom from those surprise repair bills, and sometimes access to amenities you might not be able to afford otherwise. These are the kinds of things a calculator just can't decide for you. Now, here is a fascinating upside to owning that this rule totally misses. If you have a fixed-rate mortgage, your payment stays exactly the same for 30 years. So as inflation makes everything else more expensive, the real value of your mortgage payment is actually going down over time. It's kind of like a secret financial superpower. And let's not forget the single biggest pro of owning. Your house is an asset. While our rule focuses on those unrecoverable costs, it doesn't factor in the massive potential for your home's value to grow over the long term, which is how people can create some serious wealth. So ultimately, the numbers, they're just one piece of the puzzle. As you can see, your personal lifestyle, your long-term goals, and whatever the market is doing right now, they all play a huge role. The 8.71% rule is a powerful tool for that first 40%, but it definitely can't tell you the whole story. So let's bring this all home. The point of this framework isn't to give you a definitive answer, rent or buy. It's to empower you with a much better way to think about the problem for yourself. And that leads us to maybe the most important point of this entire explainer. You have to run your own numbers. Property taxes in your area might be way higher. Maintenance on an old house could be more. And of course, mortgage rates are always changing. This rule is a template, not a prophecy. So, we'll leave you with this question to chew on. The 8.71% rule gives you a powerful starting point for comparing those unrecoverable costs. But now that you have the framework, what happens when you plug in your own local numbers? What does the math tell you about your next move?